Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of Condition Report. We are very glad to have spent the past days here with you with very fruitful exchange and sharing. We had beautiful panels that we started since the very first day. And we would like to continue on that path today, thinking about the death of the collective or its transformation. For us, it was very important to talk about what happens afterwards. And when we say what happened afterwards, is it just the fact that we consider a collective that existed before dead, or should we think about its legacy? Should we think about what it has left in terms of inspiration and experience for the creation of other initiatives? For that today, we invited 4 members of different collectives to join us for this conversation. And we have Cosmin Costinas from Parasite, who will be our moderator today. So I'm going to read a little bit of their biographies and then pass the mic to Cosmin for us to start. We're very sorry that you have been waiting. We wanted to wait a little bit to see if Kemang will join us soon, but I think he will join us in the process. So Cosmin Costinas is the Executive Director and Curator of Parasite Hong Kong since 2011. He was a guest curator of Dakar Biennale 2018, La Biennale de l'Art Africain Contemporain Dakar. Guest curator at Dakar Art Summit 2018, co-creator of the 10th Shanghai Biennale, curator of Basis Voractual Kunst in Utrecht, co-creator of the first Ural Industrial Biennale Ekaterinburg in 2010, and editor of Documenta 12 magazines in Kassel. Cosmin oversaw the institution's major expansion and relocation to a new home in 2015 and curated a number of exhibitions, including an opera of animals 2019, A Beast, a God, and a Lion, touring at Dakar Art Summit 2018, the Secretariat Yangon, and Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw in 2018, among other projects and exhibitions that he curated. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Center for Historical Reenactments that will be represented by Kemang, even if he's not here yet. The Center for Historical Reenactments, that we commonly call CHR, was a collaborative platform based in Johannesburg in South Africa. Since its founding in 2010, CHR has responded to the demands of the current moment through an exploration into the historical legacies and their resonance and impact on contemporary art. By addressing current urgencies, which have grown over the debris of the issues of the past, CHR has embarked on activities, events, seminars, exhibitions, residencies, etc., engaged local and international practitioners, and raised questions about the political potentials of artistic interpretations of histories. In their projects, CHR has investigated how, within a particular historical hegemony, certain values have been created, promoted, and subsequently sublated into a broader universal discourse. We also have Emeka Okereke from Nigeria, who will be representing Depth of Field Photographic Collective, commonly called DOF. DOF, founded in 2001, is arguably one of the foremost photographic collectives in Africa. During the most active years of DOF, members of the collective realized collective projects and exhibited together, establishing a remarkable track record of collaborative practice. The 6 artists who make up the collective assign usually themselves a weekly theme and met a week later to hold critical sessions, discussions on the resulting image. Although today the members rarely work collaboratively, they have preserved the energy and collective spirit of DOF in their respective artistic practices and thus have established other platforms of collaboration. Some notable exhibitions include Lagos Inside in 2003, Lagos Stadtansichten, at IFA Gallery in Berlin, Snap Judgment at ICP in New York in 2004, Depth of Field, South London Gallery in 2005, The Unhomely, Second Seville Biennale in 2006. We are also happy to have Merv Espina from Green Papaya in the Philippines. Green Papaya Art Project is an independent and interdependent initiative that supports and organizes actions and propositions that explore alternative approaches to the production, dissemination, and representation of art in various disciplines. It endeavors to provide a platform for intellectual exchange, sharing of information, critical dialogue, and creative practical collaboration among the arts community. Green Papaya's previous activities have included non-media-based manoeuvres, inclusive of cross-practices in contemporary art that covers moving image, sound, contemporary dance and performance, public intervention, fashion, graphic and industrial design, built environment and architecture. It has also hosted local and international residencies, started a pirate FM radio, published print and music in various formats, and even organized a biennial, the 15th edition of Viva ExCon in 2018. Starting and ending on its own terms, Green Papaya is now preparing for its closure on the 5th of May 2021. In consolidating and disseminating its archives, Green Papaya is investing in possible futures. We have Dali Al-Mamoun, who will be representing the Shomoy group. And maybe you saw already, or you still have a chance to see the exhibition that was made upstairs on the collective, the Shomoy group, and created by Mustafa Zaman. And we also have works by Dali Al-Mamoun in the exhibition as well. And we also have an installation of Invisible Borders upstairs as well. In the beginning of the 80s, a band of students from the Institute of Fine Arts joined forces to form a collective. The impulse that brought them together was their dissatisfaction with the contemporary reality, both that of existential and mainstream praxis of art. Armed with their understanding and perception of the time they wished to set in motion practices and activities that essentially were more in keeping with a vision of change. Apart from two, the majority of students were from Institute of Fine Arts in Dhaka. The members were middle class, politically conscious, but unaffiliated non-partisans. In fact, they wholeheartedly subscribed to ideas that supported human interest and progressive thought process. Most of the members were interested in and actively participated in other disciplines of art apart from their own chosen fields. They were involved in a diverse amalgam of theater, photography, films, puppet theater, little magazines, and art and culture-related publications. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Cosmin, and I wish us all a very nice session. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Hélène. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have to say before we start that, and I told Marie-Hélène this before, that I did make a commitment, like not to ever be part of a panel that is a male-only panel, but for Marie-Hélène and the circumstances, I will let this one pass, but it's still important to address that. I think that the topic that we are to discuss here has a lot of implications that go beyond collectives or artist-run spaces and go to the core of how we understand institutions, how we understand labor, life, and the intersection of these three. When do we let an institution die? When do we acknowledge that the urgencies to which it responded have changed and have become something else? When do we realize that the institution has to respond to new urgencies, or that the new circumstance altogether doesn't require its presence in another form? There is something fundamentally conservative about wanting to preserve an institutional structure. this can also mean in particular contexts the very opposite. In contexts where establishing, keeping something together, the mere idea of continuity is a progressive act, is itself a gesture of fighting with the circumstances. So there are all these fundamental differences, I think, depending on the context. Maria-Hélène also asked me to speak a little bit about my institution as well, and its quite particular history. Because Parasite was founded in 1996 in Hong Kong, and it's the oldest continuous exhibition-making institution of contemporary art in the city, and functioning uninterruptedly now for a quarter of a century, but having changed quite significantly in its history. And when it was founded, it was also, like many other places, many other institutions, built to respond to certain challenges. I mean, on one hand, there was I think the local manifestation of that global conversation in the middle of the 90s, and of sort of creating institutions to be able to be part of the growing global conversation that was taking place at the time. It was also a particular response to the lack of any institutional structure in the city that would support contemporary art at the time. There was also a very specific response to the, I think, lack of appropriate art education at the time, and the lack of historicizing or structures that would perform those functions, which also meant that in its first years it had to wear many hats. It was on one hand a small artist-run organization that was doing experimental projects, and which was simply creating space and giving space to young artists to try things, but it was also occasionally functioning as a museum. It was also occasionally functioning as a school, and it was, also very much taking a public responsibility of serving the whole scene, especially when it came to engaging with an international structure. It was also very much, on the other hand, a response to very particular conditions in Hong Kong at the time, which was the uncertainties that were very much in the air in the year prior to the handover of Hong Kong to the mainland of China. And as you might know, these uncertainties have never cleared in the last quarter century. So I suppose from that point of view that urgency still very much remained. But the other one, the structure of the art scene has nevertheless changed. And from a place that was very much preoccupied with a lack of institutional structure, and with also difficulties in establishing, I think, a sense of identity and of mission, particularly with the major changes that were happening in other Asian contexts at the time. So from that circumstances, it very much shifted to the place that it is now, that center of market and and also being in, certainly a place of commerce, and certainly a place of the presence of capital in the art market, but also on the more brighter side, being one of the places where different exchanges and meeting points could happen in an East and Southeast Asian context, being bereft of imperial projects or lingering historical memory. So that sort of neutrality that is very important for the capital to thrive is also has the benefits of being a place where meetings and encounters can happen. So after the first years, when the institution functioned very much as an artist-run space, as a collective, taking the decisions collectively, programming, through a system of committee. essentially life happened, and then 5 out of the first 7 founding members each went on their own way. I mean, either focusing on their artistic career or leaving art altogether, or focusing on other projects. So it very soon started to resemble more of a curator-led institution, but that function was performed by 1 or 2 of the founding original artists. So they did actually take the decision a few years after that to clarify the situation. I think they had this very inspired moment of, not wanting it to linger on into ambiguity and irrelevance ultimately, but to take one of the 3 possible decisions, to transform it into something else, to close it, or to try to revive that collective spirit. They decided then at the time to go for institutionalizing it, and that's when they started hiring curators, and they moved towards a different model, which, at least in terms of longevity, if nothing else, proved to be successful. But I think the fact that such a conversation did take place and all these options were laid out was quite important. So maybe this is something that we can all discuss together, and I'm also fascinated and, well, a little bit saddened as well, but fascinated by Green Papaya's decision, and also the fact that there's a very clear deadline in the future. I think this level of planning and projection is quite remarkable. But I would actually like Mecca to start.
Hello. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emeka Okereke. Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène, for the introduction. Marie-Hélène mentioned 2 collectives, actually. Well, 2 collective projects. One is Depth of Field, and the other is Invisible Borders. She just mentioned it in passing. So my presentation or my talk will be sort of like a timeline, starting from Invisible Borders and then starting from Depth of Field and then finishing with Invisible Borders. So the image you're looking at was made in 2005 in London. So that was on the occasion of our solo exhibition as Depth of Field at the South London Gallery in 2005. And this collective was founded in 2003 or 4, just right after the Bamako Festival in 2001, because the Bamako photography encounters continues to be the foremost photography encounters, and a lot happened, from Bamako. So these young Nigerians went to, for the first time, were exhibiting in Bamako, and it was under a Nigerian pavilion that was curated by Akimbode Akimbi. So one thing I have to say, though, is that in talks like this, I try to be very anecdotal, pull from personal experiences and talk about little stories, because everything else I've been written about. So my presence here is just to share little moments in between. I think that's what you take from me being here. So they worked together in Bamako, collaborated in putting up the exhibition, and it was the first time friends. They were also friends because they were the photographers in Lagos back then, working. So they came back with that energy from Bamako. It's an international event, photographers from all corners of the continent. They decided to form a collective. Back then I was an assistant to Uche James Iroha, the one with his eyes closed behind. So I remember when they came back and they were throwing around this expression, depth of field, depth of field, depth of field. And eventually they decided to form a collective of 4 people. First of all, these were friends. It was informal, and it was just a space to come together and discuss, reflect on visual aesthetics and visual language in the context of Lagos. Now, before I go further in, it's important to note that Depth of Field was founded in the beginning of the 21st century, and that's very, very important. It was coming out of the 90s, when we had Fela Kuti, for example, who was fighting the military. He was the only one really using his art, his music, to really be vocal, and he, suffered as a result of that. But then in 1999, we had democracy in Nigeria. So 2,000 people felt like it's time to explode, say things. So it wasn't just only in the photography or in the art, it was also in music and in film, Nollywood, yeah, as we call it. There's Dollywood, yeah, Dollywood here, and Bollywood. For Nigerians, is Nollywood. So all of that was sort of like forming at the same time. So there was this energy, this strong energy. We still had, literally, Fela Kuti's music still playing in our heads as young artists. So we were sort of like defiant. It was our time. Photography for us was never a thing to, come and show in the intellectual space, in the art space, and then leave it at that. We were always constantly asking the question, how can we reach people with our photographs? It was the foundation of Depth of Field. But if you take that even backwards, you come to the 60s and the 70s, all the liberation movement that gave birth to the independence. Even in 70s and even in 77, when we had all of that was symbolized in, Festac 77, also known as the Second World Black and African Festival of Art and Culture. It was massive, historical. Okay, you have the books here. I really encourage you to get those. It's from Chimurenga. It's powerful event. So all of that preceded, what led to the 2000s, the first decade of the 21st century, and Depth of Field happened to be the photographic collective that now became the contemporary photographic collective. I was having a conversation with Uche the other day in Bamako, and he was saying it, categorically that, at the time when we were thinking, there was no one who was really thinking about photography on the way we were thinking about it. The likes of Akimbode will come back from Berlin and bring books, and, the studio will become a hub for conversations. And he will go. And so that's how Akimbode, for example, people like him, Akimbode, Akimbiyi, Jide Adeniyi Jones, Don Baba, contributed. These are the elderly ones. But it was really happening on that level. So we went on through that. Usually it's informal, like I said. We come together every Friday. We bring our contact sheets. Back then it was contact sheets, not digital. We bring, and then we have conversations, open conversations, very informal, free. In hindsight, what I realized was happening was that we were creating, first of all, a space of consciousness, a space of intimate knowledge, a space for experimentation with our ideas, a space to try it ourselves, to fail, a space to have our own agency. So when I went on to study eventually at the Fine Art School of Paris, I never thought that Fine Art School of Paris was my first education. It was Depth of Field. It was that ecosystem of photographers. That was the first. And that's what that collective means for me. So we went on to have exhibitions like Maria Elena read out, high-profile exhibitions, ICP, South London, and all that. And then, of course, that energy led to other collectives like Black Box that came behind that. And and other people started working. It was really, the go-to. I remember that, if you talk about photography, you really have to come from that angle of, more like radical way of thinking about, you know, about imagery. But then what sort of like, I would say the downside, I won't say downside, today we consider Dove dead. I remember Okwi Nwozo when he made a jest. Yeah, he ran into us one of those days like, Emeka, what's happening with Dove? Dead Dove. And then so it was amusing for him, that play of word, but it's funny because we've never thought of depth of field as dead. What happened was that as we grew and as each and every one of us pursued their interests, both personally and professionally, we started to grow out of that container. And the key word there is container, because depth of field was more or less like a container for us. We didn't take it along with us, and this was what happened. We were actually living in a very highly, what I say, fluctuating times. Things are moving, things are becoming, but depth of field didn't take the time to articulate their position, our position. We stayed on that level of informality. We were having the best time of our lives. We were enjoying being friends and working from that place. But we didn't go beyond to think of the collective beyond ourselves. So we grew outside the container, out of the container. 10 years later, I will go on to establish invisible borders. Okay, so this is when we came together last time. So it's in relation to me saying that we grew old, had families, and this TY celebrating her 40th birthday. But what's interesting now is that you see that comment there from one Chidi Simon. It says, wow, 4 industries. 4 industries. What he was referring to is that each and every one has gone on to carve, and and young photographers have followed, each and every one of us. So in that sense, the collective is not dead. Yeah. So now in 2010, in 2009, I founded Invisible Borders, and the first participants of Invisible Borders, there were 3 depth of field members and 3 black box members on that first road trip. And we have gone on to do several road trips, and the project is 10 years today. So I just want to show you, a few images, how we've populated the whole notion of the collective, having learned from depth of field. You see, we've had many, and this is where we are today. This was just our last road trip with our colleagues here in Bangladesh. We traveled over 2,000 kilometers across Bangladesh, and we made this. So our colleagues from Drik, Pachala, and Chobimela. So over the years, we have been playing around with this notion of the collective and making sure that we're not stuck in this idea, in this conventional idea of the collective being centered around people, but more centered around a given idea, knowing that it's constantly moving and changing. We're much more interested in those changes, in the complexness, especially in the context of Africa. Africa is complex. And when Invisible Borders was founded, it was to deal with that complexness. But for you to deal with that complexness, you have to understand it. It has to pass through you. We don't even know the continent. We don't know it. We are trying to even understand what it means. So Invisible Borders has been that space. Most importantly, I think this image here best represents, how we are thinking about the collective. We are using our body. That's where we are now. We are using our body and our presence as an entity, as an object of useful agitation. Every road trip we make is an intervention. So this is where we are. And within that, we are questioning this tension between the subjective and the collective. At what point is the subjective weaponized against the collective, and vice versa? And this is because, let me go a little bit backwards. So in 2010, I remember one historical point in the Invisible Borders project. We all came together and we were trying to define, again, the future of the project. And the founding members were there, and they were saying, oh, let's make it a collective of fixed people. Because that way the works we create, it will mature over time, and so it will be stronger. And that's valid. That's valid, because when people do things together, they become close. But then I immediately said, no, let's not go for a fixed membership. Let us create a system where we can allow people to come and go and make it more fluid. Let us focus on it being a collective project or a collective way of being than being a collective. And so that's how we've operated all these years and continue to operate. Now, borders for us is no longer limited to the continent. We are moving. We are now going backwards to address relationships, address crossings, that predated the whole slavery narrative, the whole colonialism narrative. As part of that decolonial conversation. So that's why we are here. That's why we was very much excited doing this with our colleagues from Bangladesh. And asking ourselves, as Africans, Africa has always been a story of journeys. I was telling a friend the other day that the transatlantic ocean carries a lot of stories. It has always been a story of journeys, of movement. So we cannot relegate ourselves to, Africa and speak only unto ourselves. So what do we do with this identity, this Africanness? And that's where we are now, in this really proactive position of what do we do with this, I don't need to justify my Africanness. It's what I do with it that matters. And that's why we use the term in Invisible Borders trans-African. The trans there, the prefix there is about movement, about connections, but it's also, as opposed to Africa and now, trans-African is a verb. It's an action word. I'm African, so the trans there is what I do with that Africanness. So these are the little ways we think, or the many ways we think of the collective within our project, and that started with depth of field, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was great. So maybe Merv, you can continue, but I think it would be great since Emeka touched both on, I think, well, the life of collectives and of institutions, and I guess also like the way in which it shapes and touches the life of its participants and of people who are its audiences. But since also so beautifully he spoke about I guess the actual work that they did and the kind of like implication it has on the broader context and the region in which they place themselves. Maybe it would be interesting if you would match that as well and speak both about the life of your institution, but also how it played in a broader, I would say, like Southeast Asian or Asian geography and how it imagined itself there. So then we can have a conversation that is more analogous on different points.
Like, it's really exciting to sit here. It's like some of the chairs are tricks, and a number of them have disintegrated. So let's see. If I have a Chaplin moment. Okay. I actually wrote something like you, and I saw you browsing a bit, but it's hard to juggle, no? But first and foremost, I'd like to thank Maria Helen and Dulcia for raw material. Thank you all for your hard work and putting up with our tardiness. Catherine Weir, who we've been corresponding with for some time now, but only just met a few days ago. Naureen and Tanzila of Dhaka Art Summit for doing the dirty work and and actually getting us here. Rajib and Nadia Samdani. And Cosmin for moderating. You're the only person I actually knew in this panel, personally. And then, of course, finally, Diana for initiating this invitation. Our sincerest thanks to you all for your generosity, hard work, and hospitality. I've had a great time. I heard you guys laughing at the title. I stole it. I want to acknowledge that the title of this talk actually came from an article by writer Frankie Altamura. She had a bulky interview with me about Papaya and independent art initiatives in the Philippines. So she used this as her subtitle for the article, and I'm stealing it for this presentation. So yes, we have a predetermined date. But, and it's true, I'm here as a representative of Green Papaya Art Projects. And we are an artist-run initiative that's formally started on the 5th of May, 2000. And that's why we decided also to end on our 21st birthday, which is the 5th of May, 2021. And I think I won't be speaking for Green Papaya, not as much as I'll be speaking with, and I think it's important to make that distinction. Okay, so let's begin with Papaya. So, Papaya is not endemic to Asia. I mean, like a lot of stuff. So what is kimchi without chili? What is pomodoro without tomatoes? What is green papaya without green papaya salad? So green papaya is actually the favorite ingredient by the co-founders of the space, designer, visual artist Norberto Roldan, whom you'll see in the slides later, and choreographer, activist Donna Miranda. So it's the main ingredient for tinola, a popular chicken stew, and a number of other dishes in the Philippines and across Southeast Asia. But it's actually endemic to Latin America, particularly Central America. So it came to the region via the galleon trade. So you can thank the Spanish and the Philippines for giving you green papaya salad. So that's green papaya. So we have to distinguish, it's not the ripe papaya. So this is achara. It's also the name of a triennial we're hosting that started last Friday, and I'm not there. And this is tinola. So I'd like to take this moment to emphasize the metaphor of papaya as an organism that could stand for the migration of ideas to unknown and unlikely places, and how they take root and become vernacular. So here the fruit is from the New World. It's a metaphor for the transmigration of ideas and materials and how these can take on local flavors. So here we argue for various points of fruition and for different dialects of discourse that could potentially evolve into their own new languages. So yeah, and I'm also here on false pretenses. We're also not with a collective, or at least we don't call ourselves that. But I guess over the course of this, the past 3 days of this symposium, the use of the word collective seems to be more as an adjective or as a verb, not as a noun that we use in our context. We are also not an institution. We have actively resisted formalization as an institution. And what we are and identify as is an artist-run initiative. So among all the members, we are all practicing artists. And it came about in a moment in the 90s and early 2000s when there was not enough spaces for exhibition and experimentation in contemporary art. So there was this flurry of spaces that evolved. Third Space, that actually started with a 3-year goal. Like it's set about knowing that it will end in 3 years, surrounded by water, big sky mind, and future prospects. So all of this started between the late 90s and early 2000s. And I really like what Kojo said yesterday, quoting anthropologist David Scott about the generation also defined by a shared relationship to an event. And like, among the various events that shaped our generation was the Asian financial crisis in '97, Suharto stepping down after 32 years, and of course the second as a revolution in 2001. And I forgot to add maybe the most contemporary thing, which was in 2003, it was the SARS outbreak. So, and among that time, there was also a lot of spaces and initiatives and what would become like institutions in the region. And among this was Nyasan, and here's a list. It also includes Parasite, which Cosmin is part of. But like some of this have died in like natural or unnatural causes. Some of them have evolved in institutions. Some like a lot of them evolved from bedrooms and garages and living rooms. So I guess this is what we consider part of our generation. So I think it's nice to try to visualize where I am coming from. So if there was a fictional plane that has a direct flight to here, it would take 7 hours, but it actually took me 21. Or if I could walk, it was supposedly about 2 months. 2 months. So Green Papaya is in Quezon City. It is, so Metro Manila, when people say Manila, it's actually 17 cities. So Quezon City is one of them. And we like to confuse people by only saying Green Papaya or Green Papaya Art Projects, but we actually have 2 spaces. So one is our home, our kitchen, and the other used to be our exhibition and performance space, which we now share with the bar. And this is what that exhibition and performance space looks like. And this is the outside of our house / archive. So these are a couple that started it. Donna Miranda with Kidlat Tahimik. Maybe some of you met him in the background. And Roberto Roldan. And Joaquin, who actually started doing some music programming. He's actually younger than Green Papaya. He was born in 2003. Okay. So as the art scene changed, we have also continued to evolve. So we started in the 2000s as an exhibition space, mostly as an exhibition space, as an alternative gallery. And I think it's important to also like emphasize the notion of space here and how I think it continues to define what we do. So from doing mostly like exhibitions, we've also encouraged like experimentation and new mediums of exploration. We were among the first spaces to do fully video like exhibitions, which involved a lot of borrowing of equipment. So we have gradually evolved to not exhibiting. But we also really want to emphasize our smallness and our uninstitutionality. That meant we could get away with a lot of shit. This is, maybe some of you would recognize, a block of marijuana. So this was a sculpture by one of the artists. He used, this was a American Filipino artist who had a grant, and he wanted all that grant money to buy a block of hash to use as a sculpture. It's called Paradise Island. But the hash was so hard to sculpt. So like, oh man, we have to change materials. So we bought this block of hash, and this actually also figures into sustainability. So, yeah, so what did we do afterwards? How did we sustain ourselves? You can ask me later. We also do a lot of discussions. It's very important, and more important now, because as the professionalization of the art world becomes the norm in the Manila art scene, there's little room for actual discussion. So spaces like ours have become like more of a backdoor, not gatekeeper of the scene, where you can go straight to the kitchen and have a drink with us. And there's been a lot of drinks. My liver is damaged. So discussion. Yes, lots of old people. Discussion. And so depending on when you come from, or which event you do, it's also important to emphasize that we are not an artist collective. I said that already. So we don't make work collectively. We host a number of events. We co-produce a number of projects. I think it's best to describe us as the facilitator of a number of coalitions. And these coalitions are with other artists, with other initiatives, with people that actually call themselves as collectives. And these projects take shape in various forms, and they don't necessarily need space. This is, well, our safest mosh pit ever. We were, as Ms. Mariela mentioned, we also had a pirate radio station. We were not shut down by the cops. Pirate radio. We have contributed to the discourse of contemporary dance, and only recently did I realize how important that was in the dance scene when we started asking contemporary choreographers like the roots of their practice and how spaces like Papaya, and perhaps particularly Papaya, was important for their careers. And then we are often confused to be a restaurant because of the name. So we've had some calls. We are not Thai or Vietnamese restaurants, but we do like to feed people. So there's a lot of cooking and eating. So sometimes when we hold events, the artist, the curator, the researcher, the activists that are hosting the event or speaking or talking would actually be also cooking, or we'd have other friends cooking. And so the community has changed over the years also, from being mostly visual artists to, experimental filmmakers. It's like you can see the difference. And then one of the first events I tried to do also in Green Papaya was also bridge the gap between intellectuals and not to intimidate the intellectuals and or the artists. So we decided to get Benedict Anderson drunk, which did not succeed. Our relationship was built on one bottle of rum, and I was drunk and he wasn't. And then we have tried Tinder to expand the community, because Did you hear about that hiker who got lost and who got help because of Tinder? Anyway, so we tried to reach out to our immediate community because it's geolocative. This is our Tinder profile. And yeah, it succeeded, and we tapped into this, for us at that time, unknown community of trans and drag queens. So, and then the past caught up with us. So the decision for actually closing Papaya has been lingering since around 2007. So we've been wanting to close since 2007. When we announced to some artist friends that we wanted to close in 2007, they said no. Like, why don't you sell our works that we kind of left in your storage anyway, and like see if you can live with that and like make projects and continue. So we did that. And that kept us going for a few more years. And then like a series of other events like happened as we tried to close. But by 2014, we really wanted to close. And all the projects that we started from that year onwards are around archives and history making and remembering. And then we suddenly found ourselves organizing a biennial, which was actually started by my housemate and co-founder of Green Papaya, Norberto Roldan. So our archive kind of like exploded with new material. I'll just breeze through this, but it's called Viva XCon, which stands for Visayas Islands Visual Arts Exhibition and Conference. And that's over there in the central part of the Philippines. It is where most typhoons go in the Philippines. One important thing to stress also is that, like, unlike a lot of Asian biennales, it actually happens every 2 years. Yeah, and there's no foundation or one organization behind this. It has been started by artists and is continued to be like run by artists. Different artist organizations host the event in different cities since 1990. So that's us. Since we have the archive, we have the problem of also exhibiting it also in 2020 and also find means to actually get rid of it physically. Some glimpses of that event. And besides dealing marijuana, we also have a bar. And I think this is important because this economics problem has cropped up a few times. So Norberto Roldan, Pee-wee, he actually works as a professional designer until 2007. And he had an agreement with the French embassy that was organizing the French Spring since 2000. And the proceedings from those big contracts would actually fund the operations of Papaya. And this is what kept us going until 2007. And then almost all of us have day jobs. I work as a technician, a sound technician. So it's really a lot of feedback. So we do project by project grants. I'd hate to admit this, but there is a kind of trickle-down effect of the art market. Since 2007, Pee-wee's representation and presence in the art market was helpful, and he's deflected those proceeds to running our initiative. We've tried to diversify our income by like partnering with a bar. This is an art activist-run bar run by Tao Aves over there. And then trying to keep it small and expanding our friends network, always collaborating. It's important to also emphasize like shared materials. Like our equipment is not just our equipment, it's everyone else's. Our projector can be with us one day, it can be in this activist organization the other day, and then it can be somewhere in a different part of the archipelago in another. So we've lost materials. And then that bar, and then I think it's really helpful that we have planned the ending. This is one of the best decisions that we've made. I think by deciding to close Papaya, and we use the word close, not death, has been the most helpful thing in trying to crystallize the idea of Papaya. I'm sorry for abusing your time. I'll just jump right through. Um, I, I want to point out Leslie. She's the only paid person in Papaya. Thank you, Asia Art Archive. She's the only paid member of our initiative. But our archive is not just our material. Because of our longevity and because of our proximity to other artists. In Quezon City, there's a large number of artist studios, artists' homes. Like their material has found itself in our archives as well, which includes materials such as this, like fanzines from the 80s, films, and then. So while we have been planning for our closure, we have also started mapping different artist initiatives across the archipelago. And we noticed that there's been like two sizable generations, one after 2011 and one after 2016. But one of the things that I want to end with is like how important it is to keep our archive of Papaya as an open resource, as a kind of as a kind of oral history in a way. And I'm quite inspired by the Tausug people in the southern part of the Philippines and how they use riddles to convey wisdom. So they would tell you a riddle as early as like when you were a child, but you'd only really get it when you were like about to die or something. And that is wisdom earned. So the question for us is like, how do we live with riddles? How do we leave Papaya? I like that metaphor that Raw used of this band of birds dispersing to go on separate journeys. It reminds me of ideas of the avant-garde and how one of the aspirations was to set about the conditions for their own irrelevance, to set about the conditions that would make it like irrelevant for them to exist. And that is one of the lingering questions that we have. I don't know the answers. Maybe ask me a few months. We're ending in 15 months. So ask me again then. Thank you.
Thank you, Merv. It's great to see that you're certainly having lots of fun there as well. And now it would be great to hear from Dali about their work. And I think it's very important to point out that this would be, we're now moving to, at least a decade earlier, we're moving to the 1980s. And it's relevant not just because of course, the seniority of this history, but also because, and I think this is very relevant from our perspective, that's actually happening in a different era of collectives. You also saw in Mer's presentation, that there was a listing of other collectives that they at Green Papaya see as contemporary. And I think there was indeed a certain global wave in the 1990s that came a little bit with this global expansion of a certain idea of contemporary art institutionality, which also came with a certain type of institutional structures. And I think artist-run spaces were one of these agents of imagining the system in that way. We certainly feel at Parasite that we are part of that wave, and the kind of specific history that I also mentioned, and its embedding in Hong Kong politics is doubled by this being part of a global institutional building. So it will be, doubly interesting to hear from Dali about their work in the 1980s, which was imagined on, I think, on different set of references.
Thank you. I think still morning here, everybody, and thanks to Dhaka Art Summit, and particularly I should start with Diana, who proposed me to. Of course, you have to participate in here, and raw material. Dulce is here, and Mary, and thanks to Cosmin also today, and all of my panel discussion here, and those who people are here present for listening to me. I'm really, it's a great pleasure for me to be here today for the sessions particularly. And our group was founded in 1980s. I think you know, all of you, that here this exhibition said there is on focus on particular our group in Shomoy. So I'm really telling you frankly one thing, that our archive quality is not good. We are not concerned about collecting any things. We are not concerned about the way history, the consciousness of history, and even our understanding about time is very different than West. So although our group name is Shomoy, Shomoy means time. So time is like Papaya. I can tell you that time will never die, Time is always ongoing. And we have to adjust with the time all the time. Those people are not following time, maybe they will have to be inactive, or they have to be behind of the time. So our condition is very different. Our context was very different. When we started our group, or what you call the collectives today, even we don't have an idea about the notion of collectives in that time. We started with the work of our group, and it is also really, it was not institutionalized, it was a very informal way we started. Our main intention to actually, what happens in our mainstream practice of visual art and our institutional educations, they both were actually hangover of colonialism. I mean, yesterday I listened to this Senegal person, Bobo, most probably. It was wonderful to me and listen to him. And so we were really fed up with the practice and education. So though we were students that time, we are not happy with our education and the way our curriculum and the pedagogy itself. So our contemporary people, I think I started with the time, we are the, I think, generation after our liberation, the subcontinent politics. In 1947, the continent was divided into a two-nation theory, which is based on religion, Hindu and Muslim, So we got the two countries, India and Pakistan. We were the part of Pakistan as East Pakistan. So we have a very different experience with the Pakistan. So we go for liberation in 1971. And after 71, I think we have a very different kind of history. But though our art education not yet evaluated in the context of our time and reality. So there is our experiences with the killing and assassination and murder and violence. Even when I was in 1971, I was hardly 11 plus, but I have no time, or I was not such a kind of age to go to the join with the war, but I have experience with the senses. So I was really constructed with the violence, reality of violence. So these are the images through which I was constructed. I think the crisis of the country started with 1971. The planned killing of our intellectuals. It means our consciousness was killing. And after that, after the 71 war, the country was very different. Have to face many struggle economically, socially, and many ways. And then killing of Sheikh Mujib also. Today, the 100 years of our great leader Sheikh Mujib. And it is also a fate of the country. The way we really wanted to undo the two-nation theory for 1947. But again, after the killing of Sheikh Mujib, it was really, again, it was kind of a U-turn. So I think I'm just using some paper coolers in that particular time of post-725. The regime, the army, military regime was started. I think there are many countries of the South Asia or even Latin America and Africa is facing the similar kind of reality, which is really reality of the post-colonial countries. And I know Mary also introduced me through which I don't like to read anything right now, but you can. This is just preface of my conditions of my reality. Because of that reality, because of the conditions, we were actually the people. I like to read in such a realism of the socio-political, cultural, and creative scenario. A few like-minded contemporaries, young students were instigated to form a group to express their own experience, consciousness, contemplation, and understanding. So this was the images. It is maybe in a very oversimplified. I can tell you that the mostly the abstract notion was our aesthetics and judging a notion of art, and which we could not actually accept because of our experiences and understanding and reality is not fit into that aesthetics and notion. This was basically the mainstream practice when we were constructed. And that was the image of our art educational institutions. This is kind of a mapping of Shomoy. The Shomoy means time. How our group or collectives was. This is the map of our mindset. And the society and the politics and culture and the context. So we found that the practices and the education was not contextualized. It was really the legacy of colonialism. The art education started in 1948, which is really basically based on the Kolkata Art College. Kolkata Art College founded by the British people, colonizer. So that was really, they established this, or they founded that art education is a very different reason for their own interest. It is not to educate the people, not to educate the Homo sapiens as in terms of aesthetics and knowledge and for context with their own reality. So these are our group members. There are 2-3 members are missing, but when we try to, mostly our group was, our collective was based on practice in terms of our mainstream practice, against the mainstream practice, and as well as the art practice and art scene was Dhaka based, Dhaka centric, as a capital centric. We try to make our practice and exercise, even the art, into the periphery. So we started our collectives, our exhibitions from Chittagong. And that's the image is from the railway station. Here is me. In the right side, you see, in my young life. This is also same images, but it is into the Dhaka Art College campus. This is also Dhaka Art College campus. Dhaka. In that time it was a Dhaka Art College. Right now it is in a Faculty of Visual Arts, Faculty of Shilpakala. So I should tell you something about our collectives, or this embryo process of the getting to the name of Shomoy. We started. I think my friend, those lives in. I was from Chittagong. Most of my friends from Dhaka. When they were students in their beginning time, they used to do some mural in a public space, and then we started to create one collective, which is not create any example. It was name was Perspective, And then there was a lot of members, near about 20 members. So we really found that this 20 members is really problematic for us. Most of the people are not a similar kind of mindset. They have no understanding about the contemporary society and what we really want to do, our hardcore members. And finally, we started with the 9-man show. That's the show started from Chittagong. I think, do I have to read or you can read this? I think this is okay. Yeah. I think I can read only the last line. The exhibit works against the prevalent art scenario of that time. This could be clearly realized. It's okay, can I move? Oh, I'm sorry. This is not a gallery at all. Hey, we started from Chittagong. You see, that was actually auditorium. We have to build a gallery, transform into gallery, this auditorium. So we have to work hard. We have to carry our artwork self by self, ourselves. And even we need to meet gallery here. Even in the Khulna, we don't have any space like gallery. That was a college. That was a college and holiday. We were there before 15 days and built up a gallery. Then we exhibited our works. I'm sorry that I don't have any images of that. This is the 9-man show. The 9-man is there. And they started with my image and the Nisar Hussain, who is right now Dean of the Faculty. And the Wakilu Rahman, he went to Berlin after his having masters from Beijing. Then he stayed in Berlin around 25 years. Right now he's back and he started with another kind of gallery space. And this is Taufik, he's a sculptor. And in the middle, Dilara Begum Joli. And the Noton, Ali Murshid Noton, he was basically a photographer, but he also a student of art college. And Habibur Rahman, he went to study in MS University in Baroda in India and fall in love with one Gujarati Brahman, and right now he's staying in India, being citizen of India. And this is Shishir Bhattacharya, he's also professor in Dhaka, Charukala. And Saidullah Juiz, who was really famous for his marks and puppet maker. So these are the very poor images. We don't have any money at that time to bring out a colorful catalog. So the very simple black and white catalog. And also we started to write a statement being an artist. That's most of the statement is Bangla, so I'm sorry, but you can see in here Shomoy exhibitions is curated by Mustafa Jaman. And now this is our first poster of Shomoy. So we never uses that painting or visual art images. This is also visual art. Sorry, this is a kind of photography. So we started with the photographic images. So our poster is also, I think, it is also kind of example of our mindset in that time. But again, this is our first exhibition. We got some sponsors, one corporate bank. The reason why this catalog is better than previous one. Again, the left image is a photo etching. If you have an understanding about the 40 years back in Bangladesh art practice, the photography was never considered as an art. But we started with that. Even the materials, most of our members, they are not used to use only the oil. They use a different kind of materials. This is Shishir Bhattacharya in the right one. These are the portrait of all participants, all members of Shomoy. And this exhibition was, I think, this article published in the from Pakistan, the Herald Tribune. They make one cover story of our exhibitions, and here I could not show you that images. It was a big paper collage by Saidullah Juiz, this guy. This is my painting. It is basically on board by pencil and oil. And the Shomoy, not only, they're trying to build up, actually, the art is a kind of a practice of knowledge. And we try to build up our intellectual perception. And the reason why we also bring out some leaflet and pamphlet in particular happenings, because we bring out this pamphlet in most probably in the time of art biennale, in Bangladesh Art Biennale, which is really, we saw it and we are very much critical about that show. Then you can understand, I just highlighted our basic things of our ideas. The formula of modern art that was borrowed around the early 60s from the West, more as a fade and without proper critical analysis, and is being accepted as a cultural extension, became a dominant factor for good, authentic art can be also be felt over here. This is our next show in the 1986. We don't have money to bring out catalog, so this is just simply this as to me. This is also another exhibition. It is in 1987, and the preface was written by Professor Abul Mansoor, who was one of the renowned art writer and art critic of Bangladesh and art historian. I'm just highlighting his write-up, some of the through which you can understand about the Shomoy. So, do you think that I have to read out all these things, or you can read that? Of course, yeah. It's okay. This is another exhibition in 1990. This exhibition is especially important for us that we were jointly collaborate with the Indian contemporary artists in that time. So there are a lot of artists like Shukla Shawant is right now teaching in JNU University. Yeah, she is also one of the participants. Prabir Gupta is also, I think those people came from India, they know about them. And Torit Mitra is right now is totally changed his medium. He's doing theater, Bengali theater in Delhi. This presentation made by my students, I am not a really expert on computer. So here I can show some images through which we really got some inspirations to build up our art. Is it okay? Can I change? This is the rickshaw painting. So many artists inspired from the rickshaw painting and cinema banner, and also other traditional art form, and pot painting. And also, I think this is very important that the Indian contemporary, those people are build up a new kind of narrative art. They also inspired it, like Biman Sundaram, Ghulam Sheikh, and Mani Subramaniam. And also Asim Sultan is important to us. And this is Subramaniam. And Gross also inspired some of our artists. It is not that we are just stuck with our particular geo-boundary. We also look for the contemporary practice in abroad, internationally. Even Kitai also very important for us in that time because of the narrative form. And this is my painting. You can see it here today, even in this exhibition. This is Wakilur Rahman. This is Dilara Begum. This is Shishir Bhattacharya. This is again me and Shishi Bhattacharya, which is also you can see here. Oh, this is most probably in 86 exhibitions. At least you can see our exhibition condition. It is maybe in the late 90s. The gallery was built up in here, this circle gallery. That was really interesting, but Shilpakala demolished that one right now. It is Nisar Hussain. Maybe you can see that work also here. This is Dilara Begum. The Wakil, when he started in Berlin and came back from, started in Beijing and went to Berlin and came back again. So there is a sound, but it's not possible to use the sound really. The Saidul Akchuis was trained as a printmaker, but right now he's doing three-dimensional work also through the prepper fold. And even uses some kind of different kind of materials, which is usually not uses into our practice. This is Lala Rukh Selim. She's also right now professor of sculpture department in the Faculty of Fine Arts. This is again Shishi Bhattacharya. Okay, I think this is the way you can understand what was our group. I'm just telling you one thing. Our group was very informal. Our structure was not hierarchical structure like president and secretary. Everybody is the equal status, and we don't have any office. We don't have any space. So it is totally in a very much format of organic format and non-institutional. But our practice is very different. We have to look at the context of our time. Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to invite Kemang to speak now, and then we will all join on the stage and have a conversation. Thank you.
My name is Kemang Walewulere. I'll be talking about 3 collectives that I've been part of. One is the Collective. The second is the Dead Revolutionaries Club. And the one that I'll be focusing on the most is the Center for Historical Reenactments. In thinking about the death of collectives, I decided to speak very briefly on 2 collectives. So I've got 2 or 4 images. But as a way of contextualizing a kind of fluidity of collectivity or collectiveness, which actually comes from a question that Gabi Ngobo and myself, a curator based in South Africa, used to ask, by what right are you a collective? So the image you see here is a performance that I did in 2008 called Ukukuli Baji. And it was a performance done for an exhibition curated by Gabi Ngobo and Umonya Kawe. At the time, they formed a collective that only curated one project, which was called Scratching the Surface Volume 1. And of course, Volume 1 kind of prefaced the fact that this was the first of many projects to come, but only one project actually happened. So this was me digging a hole in someone's house, which is the house where we had been based with another collective I was part of. I'd co-founded in 2006 called Collective. And this work was very important for Gabi Ngobo and myself, and the work that we were to later do because of the chance encounter of what had began as a symbolic gesture through a performative act of digging a hole with an Afro-comb. And by chance discovering these bones after digging more than a meter into the ground. And this kind of brought up a lot of questions about history, memory, archaeology, archives, exhumations, especially in the context of South Africa, where during apartheid, a lot of political activists had disappeared. A lot of political activists were killed, murdered, and their graves were never found, or their bodies were never found. So even still today, this is an ongoing question about the large number of people who had been disappeared and are yet to be found. So this became somehow as a kind of metaphor of, or rather like a strategic way of thinking about an artistic practice or approach, which we later employed. Between the Collective and Center for Historical Reenactments, I was also part of a collective called the Dead Revolutionaries Club, which was primarily focused on publication, hosting exhibitions, talks, film screenings. But this collective didn't last for too long, actually. I think it was about 2 years. But I mentioned these as a preface to the larger body of work that I want to speak about, which is the work of the Center for Historical Reenactments, which I had co-founded with Gabi Ngobo in Johannesburg. So this is an image of posters from the first CHR project, which was a project curated in the former building of what was known as the Pass Office. So to give you some context about South Africa, during apartheid, space was divided according to race. So if you were black, colored or white, however the state decided to define you, according to your skin tone, the texture of your hair, the size of your nose, basically scientific racism, one could be able to live in certain parts of the country or certain parts of the city or not. But also equally, your ability to move freely in space was determined by your race. So one were to go to what was known as the Pass Office to apply for a permit to move around, whether it was to find a job or to travel or to move to a certain area. So we did a publication for this project, and then after this we decided actually to start a space which was launched with a project called Xenoclassia, which is Xenoclassia is apparently a rare condition where someone is said to be able to speak a language that they've never heard or encountered previously in their life before. So again, we use this as a metaphor to think about history, memory, and how we can use moments from the past to think about our present at the time. So we launched the space in 2010. And this is very important that when we launched the space, we decided that the project would only last for 2 years. So we gave ourselves a time limit. And the 2-year period was also important because we wanted to think through the format of the Biennale, which South Africa didn't have at the time and still doesn't have. There were 2 Biennale exhibitions that happened in South Africa after independence. And the second one, which was the last, happened in 1997, was curated by Oku Enwezo. And we thought about this as a kind of formula, as a strategy. And we'd been meditating on the idea of an absence of a Biennale in South Africa, what impact it might have. But also these were growing concerns for us as people, or myself as an artist, and Ugabi as a curator, whom were getting a lot of invitations to biennales around the world at the time. So, as part of CHR, we thought of CHR as a research and curatorial platform, not really an exhibition space. It was a space to present ideas and to perform research, basically. So what happened is, under the umbrella of the Center for Historical Reenactments, I, along with another artist, Utona Kukama, we formed a collective within the collective, which was called Non-Non-Collective, which was a collective against the idea of the collective. And we did, so this is a performance residue, you see, which was a meditation and thinking process through the research that we were doing. We were based in downtown Johannesburg, which is a part of the city that is largely decayed, occupied a lot by African immigrants. What's important to know is that with the onset of independence in South Africa, or end of apartheid rather, a lot of white South Africans feared that black South Africans would take revenge on them. So a lot of them moved to Cape Town and left large parts of the city empty, and this was then kind of occupied illegally, which is still a large culture of how the city of Johannesburg is run and occupied. There are a lot of what they call hijacking of buildings, buildings that are illegally occupied. So we were based in this area, which was also considered quite a dangerous part of Johannesburg. And in fact here, where we did this intervention called Naguranza. Naguranza means I love you. It's a title borrowed from a song by a Mozambican musician who was hijacked actually and killed right at this corner. His name was Gito Baloy. So we took the title as a working idea for this particular intervention, where we went out to the public. We collaborated with or commissioned an artist space in Johannesburg called the Keleketla Library, where they made T-shirts on site. This was very important for us at the time, because this was 2010. There had been an eruption of what is called or termed xenophobic violence. Basically, this was black South Africans attacking black African immigrants, oftentimes murdering them. And where we worked, 1 block away was the bus stop where a lot of immigrants, legal and illegal, would send things back home, which they bought, so they would send these on buses. So we went there with the Keleketla library and printed these t-shirts and handed them out for free. And for us, it was important to question the idea of who's a foreigner and who's a tourist in South Africa. Because a foreigner is ordinarily a term or title given to an African immigrant, whereas if you are from Europe or from the US, you are considered a tourist. I did a performance where I invited members of the public to read text to me. And then we did another project at a museum. So this is, the core of the collective was myself, Ukabi, who's at the back in the black, and Utona. But we did have Usanele and Ujabu come in and out for various projects. And this specific project was what we like to call a social sculpture, which was an intervention, a residency, which we invited ourselves actually to do at a museum of a photographer who's now late, called Alf Khumalo. Alf Khumalo is considered one of the most important photographers during the apartheid period, documenting apartheid. We had found out that at his museum, where he also gave workshops to young photographers, someone while printing forgot to close the tap and flooded the entire museum, and therefore putting at risk his whole archive. So a lot of his negatives actually were destroyed. So we volunteered ourselves as a way of a residency, where we occupied his space and basically helped sort out his archive, but also in a way curated the work that we saw or we found in the space. And this was one of our favorites, actually. Just in thinking about history, because obviously at the time Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist, not only in South Africa but by the US government, and he was, in the propaganda news, he was likened to Idi Amin, which of course later changed, and now he's seen as the saint and almost godlike figure. Okay. So you have a sense of the museum. So Alf Khumalo really, he transformed his first house actually into a museum, which is in Soweto. Unfortunately, Alf Khumalo passed away a few weeks after we did the residency, and his family basically, they closed us off from accessing and working with the archive. So we could only do one intervention there. And this is Ukabi, Sanel, and Don again. And the space had been divided according to photographic images that he took. So in this corner here, which Ukabi chose to sleep, was what we call the Winnie Mandela corner. So he was very close with Winnie Mandela. He had a lot of intimate photographs of her. And sometimes he would write at the back of the prints what time the picture was taken. Sometimes it was like 12:30 at night, and we made jokes actually that they probably had an affair. But it was just a joke. Don't quote me on this, please. And then Okwe Nwezo curated a show called The Rise and Fall of Apartheid, looking at photography during apartheid, but also photography as a weapon against apartheid, and invited us to do something. So what we did is we created a banner out of one of the photographs of Alf Khumalo, which was a banner that was being held by a student during the student uprising in 1976, saying they will never kill us all. I'm trying to speak to certain projects, but while trying to also answer like the question that was provoked to me, like the death of collectives. I think as a collective, we meditated a lot on the idea of death because we knew that we had a limited amount of time, which posed a very interesting question because one might think that if you knew your time and date of death, you would have more freedom to tie loose ends, to say goodbyes, or fix things that like relationships or whatever. But we found that actually this was not really the case because the more we were doing, the more we felt the need to do. But we were chasing this deadline we had set for ourselves, which was a 2-year period. And then in 2012, we staged a project called We Are Absolutely Ending This, which was a meditation of institutional suicide. So we're thinking about suicide. Of course, we thought about how to end the project. Do we just stop working, or do we make an exclamation? Do we make a big bang? Do we go out, or do we go silently? So we staged a project called We Are Absolutely Ending This, where so what you see in the background, which was a very important actually thinking process for the project, is a video work by Tony Coates, which is based on the Watts riots, where in Watts, people basically set alight their own homes in protest against the oppressive politics of the time in the US. So suicide became like a critical question to think moving forward, because while this was staged in Johannesburg, in our space that we had been operating in, we were also invited to the new museum for 2013, which of course posed a dilemma then, how do we exist if we had given ourselves a deadline? And we said, okay, we no longer exist after this. So instead we chose to think about this day, which was the 12th of the 12th of the 12th, the 12th of December in 2012, the institutional suicide itself. We then began to think how we might exist as a ghost or in ghost form. And part of this, like we did research on various types of suicides in literature, in art, in various creative industries, which led me to, okay, so this was, so what we did was, after the institutional suicide, we then went to the new museum in New York, and we presented the project called After Tears. After Tears is a South African, I think, phenomenon where after a funeral, there's a big party that is thrown for the dead person in celebration of their life. But After Tears is also called Wie sien ons in Afrikaans, which means who sees us, which also became really important for us to think about how do we then get seen after having committed institutional suicide, and what does it mean to continue existing beyond the time frame that we had set for ourselves. So at the new museum, I presented a performance lecture, which was based on the life and death of a South African writer who had died in New York, who fell to his death in 1965. Xenoclassia is considered to have committed suicide. And so I presented a performance based on his life and work, which was a way to think about our own suicide. But in the process of doing this research, actually I found out that Xenoclassia had received funding from the CIA while he still lived in South Africa. He received funding from through a covert foundation called the Fairfield Foundation. And this was the same foundation that got him a scholarship to go study in the US. So he left South Africa to go study at Harvard. but because of the political situation at the time, black people were not allowed to travel outside of South Africa. So he accepted his study to Harvard on the basis that he would give up his South African passport. So that meant he could never come back to South Africa. So he chose to go to the US. He went, studied for a year. And because he'd gone on a student visa, which was then expiring after a year, he had no passport and nowhere else to go. And the US government refused to extend or to give him a passport or to extend his visa. So he was left with no citizenship and basically nowhere to go. And he is then said to have committed suicide by jumping out of a building in Manhattan. That's the kind of narrative that you find as you read. But as I was doing my research through the process, I realized that the CIA had developed this covert foundation which had been funding Xenoclassia's publications while he still lived in South Africa. And I also found out that the apartment that he fell out of was owned by the CIA agent who had been the front guy with the Fairfield Foundation. And because he was still buried in the US, I decided after the performance, and it's only something that I got the idea while I was doing the performance in New York, to actually go and visit his grave. And I went with Donna Kukama, went up, we took a train upstate New York, where we read some poetry at his grave. We burned some impeyapo, which is a sage, and we did like some ritual kind of at his grave. We left New York, but I was really upset by the fact that upon visiting the grave, I realized also that the person who owned the title deed to his grave was the very same CIA agent whose apartment he had fell out of. And this bothered me somehow, and thinking about this person who, even in death, felt like he was still constricted because the South African government refused for his body to come back even in death. So while in my studio, at the time I had moved to Amsterdam, while in my studio in Amsterdam, I'd come back from drinking with friends at a bar, and I sat looking at my research material that I'd pasted on the wall. I decided to buy a flight to New York in a drunken state, with the idea that I would go and cut a piece of grass from his grave and take it back to South Africa. And this is the piece of grass that you see here now. So I did go to New York, cut the grass, and managed to take it back with me to the Netherlands. And for some time, I did performances, wall drawings, lecture presentations, text-based works, wrote some scripts based on my meditations on Xenoclassia. So that was from 2012, and then in 2014 we presented this project at the Berlin Biennale. And 2 days after we launched this project in Berlin, the South African government announced that it was officially repatriating Xenoclassia's remains back to South Africa. And of course everyone was excited because they say, oh, Kimang, you've been doing this work, look what's happened. I somehow felt defeated by the government. I felt like they stole the work from me in a way, but of course I was very happy that his remains were to be repatriated. Yeah, so this was one of the last projects I worked on as part of the collective, so I've chosen to leave my presentation here because Center for Historical Reenactments did kind of exist as a phantom ghost via multiple interventions in Johannesburg and elsewhere afterwards, but I had stopped working with the collective around the time of based on the decision we made to commit the institutional suicide and the kind of 3 or 4 projects that we did after that. Yeah, I'm going to leave it here with the hope that we can discuss more collectively or as a group.
So I was somehow surprised that the issue of money and funding was only marginally mentioned in some of the presentations. Even if we know that, very often it is actually at the, behind many of the decisions to how to shape these institutions, what to do, and very often to end it. So, this death is very often death by money or the lack thereof. Some of the institutions have closed that you mentioned. Some of them, are about to. Some of them are in various ghostly forms. But I would still be curious to ask you, if money wouldn't be a problem, what kind of institutions would you be shaping now in your context? Because very often, and in many of your talks, the kind of structures that you built were a response to things missing and a response to certain needs. And indeed, a response with, available resources. So looking at the current moment rather than the moment when you started the institutions, and again, with money not being a problem, what kind of institutions would you put out there?
I think money is always a problem. I've never been invited to a project where it's like, oh, we don't have money, even the big museum, it's always, it seems to be always an issue for me. So I think rather I would think about it differently in terms of what kind of urgency would one have, because the South African context, I guess every context is very particular, but in South Africa, society was very divided. Black people are not allowed to study art during apartheid. So for people to make art was a large political act at the time. In fact, there's a number of collectives that existed that began in the late 60s, but only lasted up to the mid-70s because the government clamped down on people. So people are forced into exile. But even the idea of collectives now, for example, in a country like Zimbabwe, where 3 people gathering in public is an illegal gathering. In South Africa, 16 people gathering without a permit is illegal. The 16th person make it illegal. And these are questions I've been meditating on. What does it mean to be a collective? What is collectivity? What does it mean to collaborate? Or by what right are you a collective? So I think for me, the question was, money was always an issue, and I feel like it will always be an issue to some degree. But rather, it's about, and the reason why I had to go through 2 or 3 collectives is because the first one, Collective, which was my formative early years, we worked with no money. In fact, if you ask me how we paid for anything, I still wouldn't be able to tell you. But we managed to do and get things done. And that's because there was a sense of urgency at the time, which was based on the fact that there were no, of course, the space now has changed, the landscape. There's more galleries, there's museums now, there's foundations, which didn't exist at the time when we began working. So obviously then the questions become different as well as the market begins to occupy or take over. As you had mentioned about now you're becoming like a backdoor rather, and it's similar in South Africa. So the questions then begin to change because even if you do have money, you are battling against institutions that are driven by the commodification or super commodification of practices. So for me, money will always be an issue, but rather it's about what kind of, what is the urgency? What are the questions of the day?
with regards to the question of money, like Kemang said, it's always an issue, but within our project, we've tried to make it secondary. And that is strategic, because if we emphasize too much on the money, we devalue or we remove emphasis in the fact that it is our ideas that actually sustain the project, and that we are constantly thinking about how to be relevant to our time. And if you put yourself in that position, then more often than not, you also put yourself in a line like the currency. You know, money flows. It's not going to be a lot, because again, you're also thinking of where the money comes from and how you are helping in the distribution of that money. So it's not going to be a lot, but it passes through you. So for the past 10 years, we have focused more on the ideas, and then we have also been very strategic with how we go for funding. We work with 1 or 2 partners at a time. We know that the other partners are there, but we want them to come to us. We want them to knock at our door, and it's been successful. For example, Osiwa, Open Society Foundation in Dhaka, we announced our road trip, and they saw it, and they literally wrote us and said, can we have a conversation about giving you money for your project, because we find your project interesting. But we've always known them, we've never written them. We've been trying to make sure that it's also like a strategy for negotiation, because you've written us an email first. It means that whatever we say to you, we already have an advantage in that conversation. And this is very important. Also, this whole question about money, funding, especially in the African context, I think that it's really overemphasized. We try as much as possible to, if we have challenges, we see it, we try to see it as part of the project. But this whole discussing money as outside or something that will always come up, we try to really, double it. But then, as I'm speaking now, remember what you said about emphasizing on the smallness of your institution as a way of getting away with anything. I found that very interesting, because we've played that as well. We've done that many times where we don't have a space, and it is sometimes intentional. We have been holding our hands back and becoming a big institution, not because we cannot do it, but because we also know that with that comes these other things, all this heaviness. And we prefer to stay like an apparition. We appear, we disappear. We appear, we disappear. That is to say, if we want to close, shop today, we just do it, I use our Instagram page, as an analogy. We post only when we have something going on. And sometimes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we don't post anything. And then we begin to flood it with, that's when we have projects, and that's really how we've been able, it's a way of also escaping all this institutional, emphasis on money, on partnership. That one is something that we are constantly reviewing. What are the terms of partnership? What are the terms of negotiations? We are very careful when we go into it. And we are always open to stop working with anyone. First time we work with a person, we say it's done. Because the project is evolving, it is relevant. The photos that I showed, they're full of young photographers, writers, filmmakers. Some of them have gone on now to be really good also art critics, and so it sits at a place where it's relevant, and as long as it continues to be relevant, the money aspect, put emphasis on this so much, I think will sort of like affect the project and sometimes push it towards compromise.
You want?
Yeah, money is of course a problem, but it's I think two-way problem. Even in our time, I think it's 4 decades back, when we started our group, Of course, our challenge is very different. Our struggle was very different. But in the era of globalizations today, the sense and idea of collective is very different. Everybody is busy with making project and having funding. So I think we, in our country, in our context, even I'm from Chittagong, it's very tough when artists professionally survive in my city. Because there is no money, there is no market, there is nothing. And nobody wants to support the art practice even. Even society, I don't know, this society couldn't think about that art is essential for the society. So our problem is different. And if you're looking for money from the corporate world, so that's a different kind of problem. So this is actually two-way problem. And right now we are no more active. But we found that even we cannot build up our archive. But what we did today, my presentation was actually, it is not properly presented. What we did actually, what was our intention, it is also causes for the money, because we cannot build up a space, we cannot build up a even archive. I mean, so that that's of course it's a reality. But it's a depend if you're looking for money per project, for a special project. But you have to negotiate and compromise with the founder. Thank you.
So we can't deal drugs anymore. But I think I agree with all of you that, of course, money shouldn't be an issue. But in the case of Papaya, the breadth of our ambition has really surpassed the capacity of our wallets in the focus of closing. And this is the problems that we are facing now, especially after doing a biennial. That was the most expensive project we've ever done, and that was the most grants that I've ever written in a year, and I'm still writing reports. So but that said, I don't think that project should be grounded on money. And a lot of the projects that Papaya helped start or advocated for, had to innovate because there was no cash. And an example would be the Kalampag Tracking Agency. So it started as an initiative between two artist initiatives, Green Papaya Art Projects and Los Otros, which was sometimes the bedroom of our international residents. Because myself and Los Otros work a lot with film, we were invited to do a screening program of Philippine Moving Image. And then we later discovered that materials as early as just 3-5 years ago were missing, hard drives have died. So the problem of access and archive to these moving image works in the Philippines, especially if they fall through the cracks of cinema, because there's an archive for cinema, or through the cracks of the art market, because it's not video art enough or objectifiable and sellable, then most often they are forgotten. So as artists and in our network of friends, we have started to collect. And through the process of showing these works and talking about them in not just the local Philippine context, but also internationally, where some of these works actually were shown or exhibited, we have been able to amass certain other kinds of capital, such as equipment. So a 16mm work that was originally made in 1964 can actually be now shown in its original format because a lab from Seoul sent us a projector. So these forms of collaboration is essential. So not so much really capital in terms of cash, but capital in terms of perseverance and determination to get certain actions done to address certain urgencies.
Let me also add to that is that I think that more challenging than money is actually finding, in the context of Africa again, is actually finding younger generation artists and individuals who will really commit and be dedicated to the idea and the ideas of the project. That is actually much more challenging to us than the question of money, actually.
I think looking at the time, maybe we should also like open it for questions from the audience.
So yesterday during the sessions, we were thinking a lot about transmission, and yeah, how that constitutes also some form of a collective. And I was wondering if, and I'm also thinking about how death or rupture is often a very generative experience in one's life. Well, in one's life, death, but and collectively as well. And so I was wondering if there are sort of lessons or that you've taken from the deaths, the ends, the transitions, the transformations that you are keen to share with younger artists or collectives, particularly also bouncing off what Emeka just spoke about the difficulty of finding young committed practitioners.
Yes. By age. Again, the chronology, I think. So we are dead till we are no more active, you know. So I think our experience is already is a kind of a legacy, with what the younger generation practice today in Bangladesh contemporary art. I think our spirit is transformed to them. We try to take challenge in our time. Hopefully that makes example for them. They will, I think, take challenge right now more and more. And right now the globe is so small. So in our time it is really hard to know how to get exposure to the globe. But today, through the internet, through the virtual reality, everybody can connect it. So the way the people wanted to inspire or get inspirations from any sources, they can get it. Even today, there are a lot of collectives in Bangladesh. In our time, nobody think about that, you know. So I think it's really ongoing. It's a very positive things happening around. Okay.
Actually, I wanted to play a video. It's from the Dead Revolutionaries Club. In the manifesto edition, there's a video by Nastio Mosquito. In his manifesto, he says, "You must fear death, but more important than death, it is to die." And I like this line. I think for me to think about money, again, institutionalization, becoming institutional, but also the idea of death and or suicide. For me, it was always clear from the beginning, I had no desire to be part of an institution, to be institutionalized. So I think the question of money also comes into play there. Like, if you had money, what kind of institution would you have? Again, I would ask a different question to say, if you had all the money, what kind of institution would you not have? And for me, I know that I wouldn't want to have an institution like the MoMA. Because also the challenge with like institutions is that as much as what we are doing speak to institutional concerns in terms of structure, locality, context, and content generation and preservation or archiving in a way, would one really want to burden themselves with like keeping like an archive of 1,000 objects? That's a mega like operation already. So, and I feel like the larger something like that becomes, the more you change in terms of your spontaneity, your ability to respond to certain questions with authenticity or spontaneity, which for me is a very important thing. Spontaneity or the idea of the chance discovery, which is why I began with the work of the digging and discovering the bones, right? Is to always try and maintain this level of spontaneity, but also the chance discovery. So I think in committing the death, the idea also for me to leave the collective was based on the fact that I found myself more and more traveling to Lyon Biennale, Berlin Biennale, this other Biennale, and around the world presenting the project. in exhibition context. And I felt like it was losing the very relevance for which we had decided to start the project. So it became a kind of a representation of something which I no longer felt I was interested in. So for me, that speaks to, and I think this was a big question, and it might have taken some time for Gabi and the rest of the team to kind of reach a consensus or to find a way to rebirth, which did happen actually. So they started another space called Nothing Gets Organized, NGO. Nothing Gets Organized, which is an incredible title. So I think in that way, it's a beautiful way to answer that question, to think about the productivity of the suicide or the death in relation to what is it that you do not want to do. So the space can go 6 months without doing anything. And there's no kind of requirement or a need to justify it to the public. Like you were saying, Instagram can be empty for weeks, you know, and it's about responding to the urgency or to the matter that comes, rather than having an institution where you fall into the pitfall of trying to fill in gaps because you have a deadline. If you've said like every month you have an exhibition, and if you are physically unable, mentally, emotional capacity, and unable to materialize these projects on a monthly basis, you continue and continue, then the quality of what you're doing is actually disappearing. And for me, this was always like a very important thing to distinguish. And for the productivity then of the death came in answering that question, or like to relieve from that kind of pressure.
In 2014, and Invisible Borders, the project, you know, had a huge blow. You know, we tried to do something that is almost impossible, and it's that notion of, you know, seeking your impossible self. So we decided to travel from Lagos to Sarajevo by road, 4.5 months. We completed it though. However, by the time we got to Amsterdam, almost half of the team have, you know, left, and that was disastrous. Threatened the project, threatened the whole notion of collectivity. It was one of those instances where the subjectivity or the subjective is weaponized, or was weaponized against the collective. And fast forward to now, in hindsight, I realized that what was happening was that we didn't understand very much how to process all of that experience within that context of the collective. We had come with this, you know, idealized idea of the collective, the kumbaya. And when you put people together in a van who don't know each other, and then they travel, and then you realize that you are always thinking of the outside border. But meanwhile, people have those borders inside. You know, people come with their predefined self, and then you put it on the road, you know, full of so much inconsistency, spontaneity, like you said, all these things that you don't know. And people are afraid of that precariousness. So they wall in, you know, they resort to self-preservation. And of course, it's self-defense, because when you self-defense, then you become a weapon. And all of that, it was the first time for me. It threatened my whole idea and principle of, I'm talking about collectivity all the time and everything. And I think that's the closest, besides, of course, Duff. That's the closest to a sort of like rupture for me in Invisible Borders. It took a long time for me to process all of that. But after many years, some of these artists who took part in that trip are also coming back and validating the space. As recent as Bamako, you know, one of the artists walked in and said, "This is beautiful." It was the same artist 5 years ago who tried to really, like, you know, actively endanger the project. So after many years, I realized that what is happening is that, you know, the idea has, you know, stood the test of time. And I understand the process better. And I understand that it is not so much about people trying to be at the end of the day, it comes down to when you are reacting to something, do you still keep the bigger picture in mind? And oftentimes it's not easy. And so Invisible Borders today now is also incorporating, has really absorbed all those thistles of inconsistencies. We don't shy away from it, we deal with it. We know that that is the content of that African unity. You know, people talk about African unity, say, what's the content of it? How can you talk about unity in such a complex space? And how can you talk about being together without friction? I think this is the understanding we have now. And so far, I mean, we have here Innocent, who's behind there, a project manager, and you have Kay, who's a writer. They came in Innocent 2016, Kay 2018. There's Delphine right here now who is traveling with us for the first time. They're all testimonies to how, you know, despite all the whole friction, still there is something about the project that continues, and sometimes it needs time. So the work for us now is no longer in that moment anymore. In my mind, I'm telling myself that sometimes it will now take 2 or 3 years to process. So now we are shifting from, in that whole idea of ephemerality, not focusing on outcomes, but process. We are shifting more now to the participants being the work. And this is what between 2014 and now, have sort of like shown me. And I am much more sort of like grounded in that notion that these things will happen, but eventually, actually that's the road to that so-called unity and collectivity that we're talking about. So yeah, that's it. And I said, talking about, you know, what the younger generation can learn or the younger practitioners can learn, this is what I constantly tell them. Look, this will happen. No one can say where the line is, you know. But to say that it's going to be a kumbaya situation, everybody, it's like not risking it. But no one is saying it's going to be successful. We are praying, we are hoping that when it's happening, that it's not going to come to a point where it breaks everything. But it's really going to get there, and you should be ready, you know, to get to that point. And that's the nature of the project. We were on the road for 10 days now with there were moments of tension, but I think a good part of it was absorbed by, you know, the temperament of our Bangladeshi colleagues. They have a way of dissipating tension. It's like, you know, they just absorb it and then it just goes by calmly. And it's so interesting. So you have all this, after 10 years, body language, people coming together, and one little thing can just rupture everything. So it's interesting that when you are in a van together traveling, you realize that the work, the being together, actually depends on each and every one and how they understand the importance of that moment. So yeah.
One of the questions I kept getting asked while I was here was, hey, Papaya, are you dead yet? Is that still a thing? Or, whoa, you're dying. Why don't you give it to the younger generations? So we don't use, I don't use that term death or dying. I think the eventual end of certain things is natural, right? And it's actually unnatural for things to self-perpetuate. And in biology, that's called cancer. So we don't want to become cancerous and take over our hosts. And for the younger generations, we actually try to get them to write or represent Papaya. But these are people now working with us who were born in the 90s, 92, 97. They're scared. They're scared to make mistakes representing this 20-year history. So I think it's only natural not to haphazardly just give this burden to a generation that might not be prepared for it. But that said, I think there's been some really successful transitions among independent artists from spaces in the Philippines who've functioned as kind of more institutions, and there's been several generations of practitioners. But unfortunately, I don't think Papaya is like this, and I think it's a bit more refreshing for us to be like this. And I think it's only also natural that I think it's a duty, privilege and a duty for artists to be able to talk about what no one else is talking about, and that's giving space. By closing Papaya, we are giving space to other things.
Good. I think there was one last question.
Just a comment to add, actually, because in Bangladesh, in art practice in all forms, it's about collectivity and rupture and death. And also collective spirit, if you visualize the way we work. Sometimes it looks like landslides, sometimes it looks like river erosion. Like, you know, it starts like this and then it actually slides down like this. So how you were saying, like, you know, sometimes for young members of a collective, fund or money never matters. But at the same time, I guess, and also, like, you know, I think we have in our practice and a very like interesting notion of death and anti-institutionalism. So the collective spirit here, we start to be together as a movement, better say, all the time, and then for money, and also the way we accommodate art in our collective, it becomes like a spiral in water. Yeah, just I wanted to add it because I think whatever you were saying, everything is very reflective in the context of our countries. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And I think we're a little bit over time. So unless there's any real pressing question that really needs to manifest itself, which doesn't seem to be the case, then I'd like to thank everyone for this session. And
yes. Thank you very much for all of our panelists, and thank you very much, Cosmin, for the moderation, and for all of you for being here. We will have later starting at 3. Later starting at 3, the open forum as we did yesterday at the end of the day. And today we're going to do this open forum together with John Tain, Cosmin again, and Mustafa Zaman. So you invited here at 3 p.m. And for those who were not here yesterday, the open forum is a space to have a broader discussion on the different ideas that emerged during the whole day. Today we only had one panel, but yesterday we had 2 different panels, and we invite the public to join the discussion just so it's not the panelists only talking, but we really want it to be an exchange. Thank you very much, and have a great lunch. Bye.